Here are two queer novels that I just read back to back, one gay, one lesbian, and both of which I wholly recommend. At the end of the video, when I finish talking about these two, I'm also going to do a little lightning round on 5 books that I've already talked about in previous videos, but are also all queer, and I also recommend them too. First up is Gay Werewolf by Tony Santarella. This book caught my eye pretty much out of nowhere for a bunch of obvious reasons. The cover art is fantastic, the title is hilarious, and I saw it advertised in the window of Gay's the Word, London's legendary queer bookshop. So I picked it up, and I was really surprised to find that Gay Werewolf is, in a sense, arguably, a kind of spiritual successor to Fight Club. As you're probably well aware, Fight Club, both Chuck Palahniuk's original novel and David Fincher's film adaptation, is a story about toxic masculinity and how it is intrinsically tied up with capitalism and with modern America's approach to cult and religious ideology. And Gay Werewolf is in many ways also that. Fight Club is the book I kept thinking back to over and over again as I read this book. Gay Werewolf is set in the modern day, and it tells the story of Brian, a 25-year-old gay man who also happens to be a werewolf. Brian lives in a big city in the US, which I don't think is ever named, and he works as a waiter. He has 2 colleagues, a woman and a non-binary person, with whom he is pretty decent friends. The 3 of them have a kind of clique going on. Brian is bored by this job, it's not a real career, he kind of takes these friends for granted, and once a month, during the full moon, Brian just wanders off into the local park and spends the night there as a werewolf, hoping he won't kill any people and instead will just kill a few raccoons and squirrels. But occasionally people do die because he's not taking his lycanthropy seriously. Brian's a savvy guy, but he's very much not a responsible person. We learn pretty early on that he wasn't actually bitten. He was cursed by an old woman to become a werewolf. There's no real reason for his werewolf origin story to be different from everyone else's. It's just kind of cute. But soon enough, he meets Tyler, and I couldn't help but immediately think that Tyler was named as a Fight Club reference. Tyler is a straight white man, young, middle class, from the suburbs, inherited wealth, lots of entitlement. He's described as looking like a Disney Prince Charming, and he's one of those guys who talks a lot and never actually says anything. He talks about grind culture, he talks about developing an app, he talks about being an entrepreneur without ever actually explaining what his work is, what his dreams are, what his goals are. He's like those guys on Twitter that talk a lot about NFTs and Bitcoin, but don't actually say anything. They talk about making lots of money, but how? Tyler already has money, but he is also a werewolf. And so he meets Brian and he says, hey, look, I know you are also a werewolf, and I have a plan. I have a business venture called The Pack TM. It's not entirely clear what The Pack TM is, because this is a cishet guy describing a vague business venture. Tyler wants to gather up all of the other werewolves that he can find, and he wants to use an app or a piece of social media or a newsletter, whatever, to try and gather all these people together. Because he has this belief that werewolves are special. Werewolves are alphas, alpha males, who need to band together, find their people, find their community, and stick together and announce their alpha-ness. I don't really know, and Brian doesn't really know either. And straight away he's like, no, I'm good, thank you. He sees right through Tyler, sees that this is just some guy who is a very toxic alpha male type who doesn't know the first thing about society. But then Brian's arm is twisted because Tyler reveals that werewolves tag people. When there's someone that you, in your human form, don't like or take issue with, when you become a werewolf, your instincts take over, you hunt that person down, and you kill them. And when that actually happens to Brian, he turns to Tyler and says, okay, maybe you've got a point, maybe we need to stick together, maybe a pack is actually a good idea, okay, I'm in. And so this gay werewolf gets lured into this pack full of toxic alpha male Fight Club types. And that's really all I want to tell you about the plot, but this is a very savvy book. I wouldn't call it an out-and-out comedy, but it is full of humor. It's a book about the current social climate that we're in, and it's a book that makes it very clear that queer people are particularly good at building community, that we have so much shared popular culture, that we often have similar political values, that we are an oppressed minority group who realize that we are better together. There are many reasons why queer people make good community. And throughout this novel, Tony Santorella makes the point, very evidently, that cis-het alpha males, toxic men, don't know how to do that. And so they do that via being fake entrepreneurs and through capitalism. The only way for Tyler to have friends, to build a community, is by creating an MLM. This is a book that just highlights the toxicity of what masculinity is right now and just how tragic all of that is. Brian and Tyler are very much at odds with each other, but Brian for a while is suckered into it, and so we get to see this culture from the inside. The vapid, empty cluelessness of toxic male culture. It's sad, but Tony Santorella manages to make light of it, make fun of it, be kind of good-natured and good-humored about it. This really does feel like Fight Club for the new age. A book that tears down the vapid and shallow lies about grind culture and the ways in which toxic masculinity seems to encourage hyper-capitalistic, aggressively capitalistic behavior, both in terms of work and also in terms of social life. The book got me to stop and think about the ways in which a lot of these men that I often see way too often on social media communicate through capitalistic terminology, through capitalistic jargon, how their social networks and their social interactions are capitalistic. And while all of that seems very, very bleak, Tony Santorella manages to inject plenty of comedy into it. This is a very, very witty, hilarious novel that consistently pokes fun at the idea of self-improvement, of grind culture, of the ways in which toxic masculinity and capitalism are intrinsically tied up. Bored Gay Werewolf is an absolute laugh riot while also being a very pointed and thought-provoking novel. And I can't deny that it's a book that made me feel very, very proud of being queer and part of a queer community. Now let's talk about Lucky Red by Claudia Cravens. This is an historical novel. It's set in 1887 in the Wild West, as you can immediately tell from the cover. Our protagonist is a 16-year-old girl called Bridget. When the book begins, we immediately learn that Bridget has been raised by her father. It's always just been the two of them. But her dad's an idiot, and when the book opens, he's made a really bad, stupid, nonsensical business deal that has lost them their home. And so they set out across the open plains and they're just walking and eventually they find an abandoned shack to sleep in for the night. While they're there, it's nighttime and Bridget's father is randomly bitten by a rattlesnake. The scene is really quite terrifying actually. Bridget lights a match and sees what's happening through the glow as her father is bitten by a rattlesnake. She lights another match and sees that he tries to grab it and so it then bites his hand as well. She lights a third match and sees her father throw it across the room and it vanishes and he takes a few hours to die. Next morning she buries him and she wanders off across the open plains of the Wild West by herself hoping to find something. What she finds is a town called Dodge, and I need to make it clear now that I was very disappointed that at no point during this novel does anyone say the sentence, "Get the hell out of Dodge." That bugs me. Bridget is immediately and very luckily scooped up by the women who run and work at a local brothel. The book is called Lucky Red. Bridget has red hair. She has spent 16 years with an idiot father, being very, very unlucky in life. And then her luck completely changes and she finds that she really takes to sex work. She's really good at it, and she's really grateful for this brothel. The place is called the Buffalo Queen, and it's run entirely by women. There are two men who work there who are really decent guys. Bridget has to learn the ropes by practicing on one of them, and then she's kind of on her own to gain clients, service them, and also make friends with all the other girls there, which she really does. She finds a family. This is kind of a found family story. She's very grateful and appreciative for what she has now. She's given free food, she has a roof over her head, a room of her own, and she's making good money. And she enjoys what she does. This is great, good stuff. But soon enough she meets Sally. Sally is another sex worker who arrives at the brothel But she's a very arrogant, egotistical young woman with pie-in-the-sky dreams and flights of fancy. And one day, while watching Sally perform her job through a crack in the wall, Bridget realizes that this is her first crush. That men are her job, but women are what she craves. But Sally doesn't stick around for long. However, Bridget now understands herself better. That said, this is an historical novel, and so at no point is any queer-related jargon actually used. We don't hear words like lesbian or gay or queer thrown around at any point. Everyone now knows, it's very obvious, that Bridget likes women, and that's just not a big deal. Nobody cares. Great. The book is divided up into 3 parts, and when part 2 begins, we're introduced to this gunslinger, a legendary female gunslinger with 2 brothers who are also pretty famous, and it's this woman that really rocks Bridget. She comes in, she wants Bridget, and Bridget is very happy to be wanted. And now she finally gets to enjoy sex in the way that she's always dreamed of, with a woman, in a very sexy and lustful way. This is a beautiful sex-positive book that normalizes and celebrates queerness, that also normalizes and celebrates sex work as well. It's a fun historical novel set in the Wild West. It's got gunslingers, it's got trouble, it's got violence, it's got action and excitement, and it's got some gorgeous lesbian love. However, I do have one big nitpick with this book, which actually isn't about the text itself. This is not anything the author has done. This is kind of about the marketing, I guess. The blurb gives almost everything away. I'm not joking. This book is 280 pages. Part 1 makes up the first 100 pages. Part 2 is the next 130. So part 3 is only 50 pages long, and parts 1 and 2 are completely covered in the blurb. So only part 3, only the final 50 pages, is left for the reader to discover themselves. That's all you get. But I also sympathize with the publisher's situation. I don't really know how else you could have written a blurb for this book because it's kind of a slow burn, and so they needed to write enough stuff into the blurb to entice people to read it. I totally get that. That said, you can't really hide your frustration if you're frustrated, and I am. All in all, this is a really, really satisfying novel as a piece of historical fiction, as a kind of fun, found family, Wild West narrative story, and as a piece of queer, sapphic, often beautiful literature. Lucky Red is a lot of fun. And very quickly, here are 5 other queer books that I've read over the last few weeks and months that I've really enjoyed. I've talked about all of them before, but I feel like mentioning them here in case you want more. First up is Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. I did a dedicated video of this that you can go and watch, but this is now my new favourite horror novel, full stop. A book about an evangelical Christian church in the US and a gay conversion camp that they control, and which is reportedly the best one in the world, which is not something anyone should ever celebrate. Our protagonist is a young woman who is a part of this cult. She's been raised in it, and she very quickly realizes that weird stuff is happening to her. She's throwing up flies and seeing visions of a demon haunting her. Why? What has happened to her? Why is this happening? She's supposed to be a good Christian girl, right? The book is, at the beginning, genuinely pretty terrifying. Then it becomes a kind of mystery to unfold before all hell breaks loose. I am amazed by this book. TJ Klune is an absolute legend of modern urban fantasy, and this is Wolfsong, a book which I have repeatedly described as, what if Twilight was gay and actually good? It tells the story of a young man who lives in a very, very small, quiet rural town in Oregon. His father abandoned him when he was a kid. He and his mum are very, very close, and one day a pack of werewolves move in down the street, and he bonds with them all really, really quickly, building up a romance with one of the sons of the family, and he's even given the option to be bitten and turned into a werewolf himself. There is an intensely problematic element to this story when it comes to the age difference with regards to the romance, and I've repeatedly mentioned that, and a lot of people are very not okay with it, so I'm just letting you know. That's kind of a trigger warning. Check it out, decide for yourself, but that aside, if it's okay to put that aside, this is a very fun urban fantasy werewolf romance. Pluralities is a tiny little sci-fi novel that is told through 2 completely different perspectives. One is a young person who is working at a shopping mall, befriends a young trans guy, and begins to realize that their gender identity is not half as clear-cut as they thought, and they are starting to question who they really are. And the other narrative is a prince from a distant planet who has decided to flee his planet and all of his responsibilities in a ship piloted by an AI that is steadily falling in love with him. Really, really fun little sci-fi book that you really should check out. Bellies by Nicola Dinnan is another novel that I've done a video about. It is a beautiful kind of coming-of-age queer story about two gay men who meet at university and fall in love, but as soon as they finish university, one realizes that she's actually trans, and what does that mean for their relationship? The book is told from both perspectives, as one character comes to terms with her trans identity and the other comes to terms with the future of their relationship as a result of her being trans. It's a story about love, but not a love story or a romance. It's more complicated than that and arguably more beautiful. Bellies is real good. And finally, Transitional is Munro Bergdorf's memoir about being a trans woman. But it's a memoir with a bit of a twist, because it's not just about her. It's about the concept of transitioning, and not just transitioning in terms of gender either. It speaks to the idea that transitioning is a thing that we all do all of the time in so many different ways throughout our lives. We transition constantly as we grow, as we change, as we shift, in terms of our personal lives, our professional lives, in terms of our location, in terms of our politics, in terms of so many different things. Transitioning is a normal part of life. And she tells her personal story while reminding us of that fact. It's real good. Now it's time for my Patreon book recommendation of the week, and this recommendation comes from Ian Higgs, who is a longtime friend of the channel and an amazing patron. Ian has recommended Termush by Sven Holm. This book was recently republished, and Ian says Termush is a luxury coastal hotel which was booked by the occupants before an end-of-world disaster. Now they live as normal a life as the hotel can provide, while questioning what a new human code of morality looks like. Fascinating, dull daily repetition, and disaster survivors knocking on the door. And it's only 144 pages. Ian recommends really, really great stuff. If he's recommended this, it's definitely something to check out, so you and I should both do that. Thank you, Ian. There you go. 2 short book reviews, a lightning round of 5 other great books to check out, and a recommendation from Ian. Good video, Willow. Well done. Join my Patreon if you'd like to recommend me books, and I'll read them out on a video, and subscribe for books.